SportsLit is co-founded and co-hosted by Neil Acharya and Nate Sager. Technical producer and engineer, Michael Ella. Executive producer, Neil Acharya. Today's host is Nate Sager.
Welcome to a new episode of SportsLit. I'm Nathan Sager. Today I'll be in conversation with Jonathon Jackson. He is the author of, if I can read the card here, The Making of Slapshot, Behind the Scenes of the Greatest Hockey Movie Ever Made, revised 46th Anniversary Edition, re-released October 13th, 2023 by Double J Media. I have a personal announcement. Neil Acharya has a $100 bounty on my head if I go off the rails into full Slapshot fanboying. Author Jonathon Jackson started work on the making of Slapshot in 2006 while he was a reporter for the Owen Sound Sun-Times. He had to win over his original publisher, John Wiley, about going with a first-time author. Hey, they like that name recognition on the front of the book when people are, doing their holiday shopping. This time around, the making of Slapshot is on his imprint, Double J Media, and he's promoting the book while completing his master's thesis at the University of Waterloo. Go Warriors! Now, we do need some commentary on the movie to explain how it became the timeless classic that merited a book-length exploration by Jonathon. On one level, Slapshot resonates, as Neil's pointed out to me, due to representation. An entire generation had never seen hockey on a movie screen before it hit theaters in 1977. The year I was born, by the way. I, as someone who just got to find it as an adolescent, and some would say a permanent adolescent, I put it in the inner circle of the great 1970s comedy. It's from a very different Hollywood, and it's really not of Hollywood at all. It's a product of its time in all senses of the word, positive, some pejorative. But I thought it really caught the zeitgeist of, just America and pro hockey in a turbulent time. But also, it's not a documentary. It's not a drama. It's the core of the funny is how the screenwriter, Nancy Dowd, found the humor in some of the dark truths. She showed how these minor league players on the fictional Charlestown Chiefs and the townsfolk who cheered them on in a small Pennsylvania town, they're kind of trying to, block out just the precarity of their existences. Right off the hop in the movie, we learn Charlestown has, quote, 10,000 mill workers on waivers, which is threatening the team's viability and the economic future of the town. In fact, I think I've read that Johnstown is today has some of the lowest per capita incomes in that state. And like, Jonathon as an author, the screenwriter Dowd, she delivered the goods on her first try with this writing form, which is really something amazing. Now, for me, it's brain candy. For me, I'm as big a comedy nerd as I am a sports nerd. To sort of have Jonathon's book as a record, how did all the pieces get assembled? How did the public react to this movie? On the first count, Jackson goes so far as to say it was a bit of a miracle on ice how it was made. On the second, this is my personal opinion, I view Slapshot as art. You know how I know it's art? Because not everyone got it right away. No one should ever get true art right away on the first pass, because it's going to threaten some people. It's going to make them, review their boundaries and their hangups, and eventually they'll come around on it. The principal creatives in Slapshot, and so that was Dowd, leading man Paul Newman as player coach Reggie Dunlop, director George Roy Hill, the other actors, the pro hockey players who played the Hanson brothers, et al. They really just held up a mirror to the hockey culture at the time. What they brought to the screen, it was really ripped from real life. I guess the hockey culture just, had to let that one marinate. But lo and behold, 3 decades after the release, when the NHL held the first Winter Classic in 2008, there was a feature on the movie, and Bob Costa said, you can't celebrate hockey without Slapshot. As the author, Jonathan covers how Slapshot has been just enduring through the merchandising, the memorabilia, people quoting the one-liners, just this mystique built. It's the hockey movie that just spans generations. It's not a family movie, obviously, because of the language, but it's kind of the movie that back in the VHS era, in the late analog era, that was a movie that was shared within families. For me as a Zennial, it was kind of like your parents are saying, okay, you're old enough to watch this and understand this and not go around repeating all of the language. And then maybe you sort of see that process repeat itself a few years later when your younger brother and his buddies are starting watching the movie. They're, falling on the floor laughing at the Hanson brothers. So I think the making of Slapshot by Jonathon Jackson really reminds us of just what a constant it's been in hockey lore. And I think it's a legit great movie. It really drove home the point that a good movie has no small actors, right? No small parts, only small actors. And that sort of made me reflect on, what was at stake in the recently settled strikes in Hollywood, where writers and actors went out for months, to keep their work, their agency, their, sensitivities from just being turned over to AI. You couldn't make Slapshot with AI. But Slapshot was also timely. Since in the 1970s, hockey had a real goonism problem. It's not for nothing that the rival team of the Charlestown Chiefs, the Syracuse Bulldogs, are dressed in Philadelphia Flyers colors. Now, there had always been a place for winning using intimidation in hockey, as a tactic. It had always been there. The famous credo from Conn Smythe, the man who built Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. You can't beat him in the alley. You can't beat him on the ice. The game took, like a lot of our sports, it took form in the late 19th century when there was a lot of hand wringing about, young men being soft and fighting, in a sport that was as fast and physical as hockey. Taps into so many emotions. Fighting came to be seen as an honest outgrowth of a mad blood stirring, stick tap to our friend Damon Fairless. But starting in the 60s, it started fighting to morph into something that was stagey and strategic. And that kind of lasted in the NHL probably until well into this century. There's another book that Neil and me are actually reading by a hockey person who played in the era of Slapshot, the 70s and 80s. And something he wrote was, what took the shine off pro hockey was the pressure to fight, unquote. Now, he wasn't a finesse player or a lady binger, as they're known in hockey parlance. He prided himself on being a scrappy winger, but, being a goon left him cold. So that theme, in a depiction of a sport that was not commonly put on movie screens up until that point, that was new to audiences. And of course, there's the language, which, at that point, I think it was only about 10 years past the first time the F word had been uttered in a Hollywood movie. And Slapshot's got the actors, including, Paul Newman, blue-eyed, handsome Paul Newman, cursing like a carpenter on a ladder who just dropped their nail bag. So Slapshot is disruptive. It's a reaction to disruption. It's a, sharp study of people reacting to disruption. You got to remember, this is 1970s America. There's fallout, just the fallout from Vietnam and Watergate. The motion picture industry is going through upheavals that, ultimately produce what's known as the second golden age of Hollywood. And then hockey's got its own disruption, self-inflicted. The NHL, starting in 1967, 10 years before the movie came out, it had expanded rapidly to try to get more Americans to consume their product. Everything old is new again. It had also had to add more teams to try to, ward off the upstart World Hockey Association. In fact, at one point, the number of top flight teams in the two leagues numbered 32, which is the same number of teams as the current NHL. But imagine trying to stock all those rosters without a third of the league being European, without as many American players. Yeah, talent kind of got watered down. So some teams took the tack of deciding the way to win was to have, 1, 2, 3 players in the lineup whose key role was to hurt and intimidate. The Flyers, kind of wear it to this day for being the Broad Street Bullies, but they were far from the only ones. In fact, even saw footage from 1977, the year Slapshot came out, and Toronto Maple Leafs captain Daryl Sittler is on a CBC program for, adolescents, aimed at, teenagers. And he's asked flat out about what was going on in the ice. And he was actually supportive of state level intervention. The Attorney General of Ontario had actually brought charges against Philly players for what they did on the ice during a playoff series against the Leafs. So imagine that. He's like, yeah, man, let the government intervene. You wouldn't see that now. Everyone's all, stay in your lane, eh? Just to put it in perspective of how out of hand things got, the Flyers had a enforcer, Dave the Hammer Schultz. In 1 year, he had 472 penalty minutes. That's 3 times as many as the most penalized NHL player in 2023. That's how much the game is, healed itself, I would say, really. But it was really bad in that point, and it ended up actually costing the NHL a national TV contract in the U.S. with NBC. It was off major broadcast networks for almost 2 decades. So that's sort of background to what the movie was about. In terms of the nuts and bolts, the team that inspired the Charlestown Chiefs was the Johnstown Jets, which was a minor pro team, either a notch or 2 below the show. Hey, the Johnstown Jets and Jonathon Jackson, Double J. I see what he's done there. Nancy Dowd's brother, Nancy Dowd being the writer, her brother Ned was a forward for Johnstown. With her, writerly curiosity peaked. Nancy went down, she hung out with us hockey players. It was Jonathan Chronicles. She gave her brother a tape recorder to capture the dressing room dialogue. And she had the ear to turn that into incredible dialogue that you probably still hear in arenas to this day. And like I say, she was writing what was really happening in games. Steve and Jack Carlson, who played 2 of the 3 Hanson brothers, they really did go into the stands to fight fans. The way that these guys sort of lived in this very strange but special world. Dowd knew she had something. So she pitched her ideas to some producers, Bob Wunsch and Stephen Friedman. They gave her an advance to write her script. It made its way around Hollywood, and big-time directors and male stars were curious. Al Pacino, for instance, wanted to play Reggie Dunlop, but there was, of course, a big problem there. He couldn't skate. And Jonathan notes that director George Roy Hill, he saw that he got the humor in it, and that's important. The director has to understand why this is funny. Of course, Hill and Paul Newman were very close, with Robert Redford alongside as a co-star. They had made Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and then they had made The Sting. The Sting won 7 Academy Awards, and Hill earned Best Director. Newman knew how to skate, so he got up to speed to play movie hockey at age 51, the same age that Gordie Howe was during his final NHL season. Actually, I think that's the same age that Jaromir Jagr is now, and he's still over playing in Czechia. How about that? Hill was a friend of comedy. In fact, Neil will probably appreciate hearing this. His last directorial work was actually a Chevy Chase comedy that the 2 of us remember fondly from our childhoods, Funny Farm from 1988. Chevy Chase's on-screen wife was portrayed by Madeline Smith Osborne, spouse of former Toronto Maple Leafs forward Mark Osborne. Hiya, Ozzy. Of course, Paul Newman, his energy returned to the earth in 2008, but I mean, he was like a movie star for like a solid 40-year run. Like, had that, he was a man's man, one of the guys, but, but he had that social conscience. He was a guy who drove race cars, but he did good works. You probably know the Newman's Own salad dressing, that sort of thing. The fact that Newman, the second lead, Michael Onkeen, and other actors were solid skaters alongside the pro players who sort of played small roles with just a few lines, it really sold the authenticity. Michael Onkeen, like his character Ned Braden, was an accomplished NCAA hockey player. And of course, as far as the story goes, the through line is the players learn early in the film that the Chiefs are folding. So Reg, faced with, what am I going to do without hockey? He, creates this puck and bull story about a Florida retirement community buying the team. And then the GM, Joe McGrath, played by Strother Martin, he brings in the Hanson brothers, these 3 horn-rimmed glasses wearing Hicks from Minnesota mining country. And initially, they repulsed Dunlop and all the veteran players. They brought their effing toys with them. But soon enough, Reg turns them loose to wail on opponents, and the team starts winning. And of course, Reg along the way has 3 antagonists: his line mate Braden, old man McGrath in the front office, and of course, whoever is the person who owned the Chiefs, as goalie Benny Lemieux puts it. Reggie and Braden, they hang out together, they're line mates, but they see the world differently. If you read the pick up Jonathan's book, and please do. We'll have a link on sportslit.ca for where you can go to buy it. It's actually doing very well in its second time around. He explains that Onkin really went method to make Braden seem like a guy who was on his own agenda, which of course is a no-no in hockey. You must be one of the boys, is a Hitch from Shoresy would say. And of course, Jonathan's chronicling reminds us that Slapshot was a really good sports movie where women have agency in a very male world. That included, supporting work from Jennifer Warren as Francine Dunlop, Swoosie Kurtz as the one-liner drawling Shirley Upton, the wife of the captain, and then Lindsay Krause as Lily Braden, Ned's wife, who's fighting depression. And then, of course, there's antagonist number 3, in the sort of big reveal. Reggie tracks down, the team's benefactor or chairperson, wealthy widow Anita McCambridge, who, calls him out on his Florida fantasy. And it kind of all just brings home the point that, sports is this brutal, big, and stupid business. We watch it because we want to see who wins and loses, but the only stat that really matters is the bottom line. Anywho, Jonathan's book is really just a reminder of how this movie blended, I think slapstick comedy and a bit of what the sports writer Dickie Dunn calls sad commentary. Even 30 some years after my parents decided it was okay for me to watch this, I can still find new details in it because it's so well made. Take a scene where, you've probably seen it, comes up on YouTube all the time. Reggie Dunlop, he walks into the rink before a game. He hears music that stops him dead in his tracks. So he goes up to the organist's booth. And he rips up the sheet music and yells at him, "Don't ever play Lady of Spain again." Ugh. Now, it works as a non sequitur, but it's actually reminding you of when Reg had his Breaking Bad moment. It's around the 45-minute mark. There's a home game. He chirps at the opposing center. He chirps back. And defenseman Dave Carlson, who hasn't yet nicknamed himself Killer, decides to precipitate a fracas. And then, of course, Reg decides to release the 3-headed kraken that is the Hansons. But what was the organist playing when Reg was taunting the opponent? Yeah, it was Lady of Spain. So eat your heart out, Vince Gilligan. So coming up, Jonathon Jackson will discuss how he tried to capture the spirit of the thing in The Making of Slapshot, revised 46th anniversary edition. And if you want that $100, you got to earn it, Killer. Welcome, Jonathon Jackson, and heartfelt congratulations on the book. So take us back. When did it hit you, around the mid 2000s, that Slapshot, the making of the movie, merited, a book-length treatment?
Thanks, Nate. It was 2006 when I first had the idea. I actually had an idea to try to write a book because I was working in a newspaper job and it wasn't entirely fulfilling. So I was looking for something creative that I could do to spread my wings a little bit. And so I tried one idea previously. It didn't really pan out. So it just happened that there was a Slapshot cast reunion at the Angus Glen Golf Club just north of Toronto in the summer of 2006. I believe it was August. I'd have to look back at my calendar, but I think it was August of 2006. And so I'm not a golfer, but I thought, this would be kind of cool to go down and invade this cast reunion. It was a charity event that they were doing for Paul Newman's Hole in the Wall gang camps. So I went down, I met everyone. I started asking people questions. People were very welcoming. First of all, they didn't kind of look at me as this intruder, like, who is this guy and why is he asking us all these questions? So I showed up, I started talking to people, and they were so welcoming and so giving that the stories they were telling me, it quickly became apparent that there was an idea here. And I should backtrack a little bit because I hadn't gone there with the intention of writing a book, even though that was an idea in my mind that I wanted to write a book. I went there thinking that, maybe there's a magazine article here that I could pitch somewhere. But what happened was the stories came at me so fast and so comprehensively that I kind of realized really quickly that there was going to be way too much material here for a book. or excuse me, there's
The
going to be
magazine
way too
article,
much
yeah.
material here for a single article. And so I started to think bigger at that point and thought maybe this could be the book. And so I asked one of the cast members who was there, Paul D'Amato, who played Tim Dr. Hook McCracken, if anyone had ever written a book about it. If so, I hadn't seen it. And he said no. And I mused out loud, maybe someone should. And he just said back to me, maybe someone should. And I took the hint. So it started from there. I started trying to track people down one by one. And a very interesting thing happened. Whenever I would contact somebody, they would say, okay, well, who else have you talked to already? And I would tell them. And then they would say, oh, well, have you talked to so-and-so? And then they would sort of give me a lead on how to find so-and-so. So it snowballed really. Snowball is the word that I like to use to describe how it came together. It just sort of, it was very organic. It just happened. And before I knew it, I had the material for something that I thought could be a book.
Yeah. And how much just, I guess, good self-talk did you need to sort of just keep yourself going? Because as you mentioned, you were writing for the Owen Sound Sun-Times when you started it. And I think it was about a 4-year process to get it from idea to market back in 2010 when it was first published by Wiley.
Right. Quite a bit. Early on in the process, because it was coming together so quickly and so easily, I didn't really have to talk myself up a lot during that process because it just felt really good. As you all know, Nate, the interviewing and the researching is one thing. The writing is something entirely different. And this was back in the days before transcription software. So there was a lot of transcription and a lot of angst that went into that. Unfortunately, and I don't mind talking about it now, but at the time it was a very sore spot. I lost my marriage and then my job during the process, one after the other. So yeah, there were a lot of stops and starts as I sort of struggled to navigate my new environment as a full-time single father of 3, as well as trying to freelance to make enough money to feed these young people who lived in my house that somebody told me you had to keep feeding if you wanted them to survive. So
yeah.
So yeah, it was a lot of. I'm sure it could have gotten it done a lot quicker if not for that. But things happen for a reason. The process went how it did because it was meant to go that way, and I think I came out a better writer for it, if not necessarily a better father.
Oh yeah. Painful though it might be, I'm picturing like by the end of this, you must have felt like Reggie Dunlop when he's just muttering to himself, "Oh, what an effing nightmare."
Can I say that?
Yeah, we follow the BoJack Horseman rule, like you're one F word per season.
Yeah, that was kind of how it felt. Yeah, at times. Strangely enough, the solace that I found was in the writing. Once the transcription was done, or the transcriptions were done, I did find a lot of solace in writing late in the process, and knowing that, okay, as long as I can get it done, it will be published. Somebody actually wants to take a chance on it. That really drove me the last few miles to finally get it done.
Yeah, sounds like almost like a runner's high in a sense.
Yeah, very much so. It's the kind of thing also, like, I haven't ever run a marathon. I don't ever intend to.
Neither do
but I would think that people, when they finally get done, they think, oh my God, I'll never want to do that again. And then it's not too long after that, they start thinking, maybe I could do another one. And that's kind of how writing a book felt and feels.
Yeah, and I also wondered, just as you went along, I mean, you were able to make contact with a lot of significant people, some of whom are no longer with us. But how much just sort of persistence did it take when you got to that level, like people who, like the movie industry people behind the camera?
Once I was able to get people, they were really good. Like I didn't have to twist any arms. If I could contact somebody, they were on board. it was just a matter of getting two people, and that took some diligence. Paul Newman being a good example of that, probably the best example of that. There were people that I didn't get, unfortunately, but it was, you weren't. I realized early on that I wasn't going to get absolutely everyone. First of all, George Roy Hill had already passed away. Strother Martin had already passed away. So I recognized early on that there were going to be limitations that I just couldn't do anything about. And so as much as I tried to get some people, I just wasn't able to. But the ones that I could get, once I tracked them down, everybody said yes.
That's basically, of course, Paul Newman's the energy of Paul Newman, of course, returned to the earth while you were working on the book. I must imagine what there were some emotions for you, and as much as anyone who enjoyed the work of Paul Newman over his incredible Hollywood career.
You know what I think of when I think of that? It was my father who called to tell me that I don't know where I was or what I was doing, but I hadn't heard the news, and it was my father who called to tell me that that he had passed, and then a year and a half later, my father passed as well. So now when I think of Paul Newman dying, I think of my dad, and yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm taking you down. I feel like I'm taking you down a dark path.
As well as slapshot loss along the way.
Yeah. But now, as far as the book goes, what do you see as the value of having like a sort of a record of how this media, like I consider Slapshot to be truly an artful movie. What's the value of having a book that explains how this was put together, like how it got made?
That's a really good question. I think it's one of those things that we cherish and we value as hockey fans, and particularly Canadian hockey fans. But I don't think that we show enough respect for behind the scenes stories like that. And I don't know why we are like that, whether it's the Canadian aspect of it or the hockey aspect of it. But it's funny the number of people that I thought would really love this book because they really love the movie, but then you find that they're not really readers per se, and you kind of get that. Like everybody wants to quote the one-liners, everybody likes to banter those back and forth. Not a lot of people, unfortunately, like reading the nuts and bolts of things like that, which is disappointing and it's frustrating in a way, because I set out to write the kind of book that I wanted to read. I didn't want to dumb this down in any way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm still proud of it from that standpoint. And, if I could do it over again, I wouldn't compromise it. But I just wish that more people were into stories like that, like I am, and like a lot of other people are, just maybe not necessarily for hockey people or I guess I shouldn't really paint Canadians all with the same brush. I mean, like we do love our heritage minutes, right? So.
Oh yeah. Of course, I'm thinking of all the sacrilege moments, the Comedy Network parodies. My brother and I quote those to each other all the time. The one where it's parodies James Naismith inventing basketball, except instead of peach baskets, it's a pair of men's underpants. If we can't carry the ball, how do we get a good shot at the underpants? Anyway, now of course this is interesting. It's been a sort of a two-stage process for you, because the book came out from 2010 with Wiley, and you had to win them over as a first-time author. But in the dozen or so years since, now what was sort of I guess almost like the obstacle course you had to go through to reacquire the rights and then bring the book back out through your own imprint?
That's a really good question. And I think it sort of fits in with my life and my career in general. The obstacles are always bigger in my mind than they are in reality. And so what happened was John Wiley and Sons did publish the book, the hardcover in 2010. They came out with the paperback in 2011. And then they sold off their sports books division in 2013 to HarperCollins.
Okay.
And HarperCollins, declined. They did, consider republishing it, but then ultimately decided to not go ahead. So that meant, the book went out of print. I didn't have the foresight. Actually, I didn't really have the money to buy up any stock that they had remaining, if any. So it would have gotten pulped. But then what that meant is that over the years, if people asked me, for the book, I wouldn't be able to, satisfy that need. There were the online sources that would sell them for like hundreds of dollars, which I couldn't imagine why.
Yeah.
Like it's out of print, but okay, I don't think the demand is that great that one copy is worth hundreds of dollars. And so I had a lot of trouble wrapping my head around that and thinking, like, who would ever pay hundreds of dollars for this book? I mean, I love it. I'm biased, but it's not worth hundreds of dollars. And I wasn't going to get any royalties on a purchase like that anyway. So it was just, so I got the idea that, maybe, I could republish it someday. So after inquiring again with HarperCollins, the gentleman that I conversed with on email, he was very kind, and he said, well, we'll just give you the rights back. So, okay, perfect. I didn't have to pay for the rights, got them back. But then in my head, because I knew nothing about the self-publishing process, because I thought I'm never going to get another commercial publisher with this because it's an old property. But I never looked into the self-publishing. I just kind of assumed that it would cost a lot of money, which I didn't have. And so it wasn't until the past year or so that I realized that actually you can go through Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing and there is no upfront cost. It's just, the time that you put in. Once I realized that, I think to myself, like, God, I could have had this out 5 years ago, or I could have had it out for the 40th anniversary of the movie in 2017. But again, like things like that are just obstacles in your mind more than they are in reality.
Yeah, we had that. I think we had. You reminded me of when Dwayne D. Rosario came on with Neil and I in, I guess, late last year. And he had a line in his book, something about, so I think it's fear kills more dreams than failures ever will. And I remember as soon as I saw that in the book, I was like, huh? Because, what you're saying about, I guess, confidence challenges, it really hit with you. Now, one thing I haven't thought to ask and had jotted down was, how did you we're about roughly in the same generation, came into the world in the 1970s when the movie was released. The movie came out in 77. How did you discover Slapshot initially when you were young, Jonathan?
That's a really funny story. So my parents and my older brother went on a vacation to Hawaii in 1977, and I wasn't there, but the story went that they were in Honolulu one day, and my brother, who was a big hockey fan and a hockey player, sees the marquee for Slapshot, at a theater in Honolulu in the summer or spring of 1977. So he went to see the movie. Like, my parents weren't interested, so he went and saw this movie, alone in this theater in Honolulu, of all places. So a couple of years pass. He bought the novelization of the film, and back then novelizations were pretty common tie-ins with movies. So me being like 7, 8 years old at the time, I really didn't have any idea who Paul Newman was, but I got the sense that this was a book about hockey, and hockey was my favorite sport. So I picked it up one day when he wasn't around, and I started leafing through this book, and I was just, captured is one way to describe it. Agog is a better way, probably, at what was going on in this book. It was very graphic. It was very detailed. Went way beyond what a screenplay would be expected to deliver, and it was just, I something changed in me that day. I think that's maybe when I decided I wanted to be a writer, but I definitely wanted to see this movie that was connected to this book. So what happened was, basically, I co-opted this book. It became mine, and I still have it to this day. I'm looking at it on my bookshelf right now.
Oh, sweet.
And I took it to school, and at lunchtime, I would read aloud to my classmates, to the guys in my class, the most profane, obscene, passages that the book had to offer. And I have a grandson now who's 8 years old, and he's coming up 9, so the same age that I was then. And if the school were to ever call and say, well, he was doing something like this, I would be appalled. My parents would have been appalled if that had ever come to light. But But I'm a Gen X kid, so nobody paid any attention. Nobody cared.
Yeah, our era, we were kind of allowed to make mistakes, and I'm having flashbacks to a school cafeteria in 1989, and a teacher overhearing me quoting Eddie Murphy and Coming to America. So you can imagine those cafeteria tables were spotless by the time I was allowed to go back to class.
Yeah, in my case, though, no teachers ever overheard me. It was just something we would giggle and titter about every day because, when you're 8 and 9 years old, swearing is like this new superpower that you've discovered that you can have access to.
Yeah.
So then it wasn't until after that. So that'd be around 1979. I ended up not seeing the movie until 1982 when it became broadcast on network TV, heavily edited for television, of course. It wasn't for another couple of years until I finally saw the VHS version. So that would have been 83 or 84.
Yeah, and the VHS version was like it was like a time honored thing, as I recall. I remember a friend, and he listens to this podcast, telling me how he never bought a VHS copy of the movie like for his own. He would, because it didn't have because they didn't clear the music. I think you have this in the book. They didn't clear the music rights,
right?
So it was they would have different generic music in the version you could buy for yourself than the one you could rent from a video store, which I found, like that's dedication as a fan.
That's true, because I mean, right now when you hear the song "Right Back Where We Started From" by Maxine Nightingale, that's the theme of the movie. So, but you can imagine there were many years when you couldn't hear that movie associated with the film because it hadn't been licensed. So, that they had generic. I can't even remember. I probably got a VHS here in the house somewhere, but I don't have a player to play it on. I couldn't even tell you what the songs on it were like whether they even sounded close to the originals. I don't know, probably not, but it didn't much care because we were there for the movie anyway. Yeah. Yeah, I do remember being disappointed the first time I saw the movie, because if you ever have a chance to pick up this novelization, if you're a fan, definitely do so, because it is so detailed. It is so graphic. And there's no way that the movie, it was based on an early version of the screenplay, as I found out later. You could never have made a movie with as much detail as this book included. So I remember feeling disappointed when the movie came out because it didn't match up to the novelization as far as I was concerned. Nowhere close.
Yeah, of course, with comedy, when you're transferring it to the screen, it's got to be kind of tight and bright is the term I always use, thinking back to when I wrote for a tabloid format newspaper. Now, to illustrate that, Jonathan, I was hoping you would read a section about Dee Dee Allen, who is a famed film editor in Hollywood, and the work that she did to sort of get the movie where everything kind of for every action there's someone reacting to it. But I was hoping you could read a passage about Ms. Allen.
Sure. Yeah, before I do, I'll just preface it with Dee Dee Allen. She was a legend in the business. There weren't very many. I don't know if there were any female film editors other than her, but she had worked with George Roy Hill in the past. She'd worked on Paul Newman movies in the past, and I believe. Now, I was told this by one of the producers of the movie that when George Roy Hill insisted on giving her a credit for, I think, Slaughterhouse-5, that was the first time that that a film editor had ever been credited on screen in that way. So, she was definitely a big part of the process. She was in Johnstown, Pennsylvania during the filming, so she was there all along, and so knew what was going to be required when she actually sat down with the with all the footage. All right, so George Roy Hill and editor Dee Dee Allen worked through the rest of 1976 on the footage. Allen had been on the shoot from the very beginning, and no one had any doubt that she would able to help Hill pull the film together. Quote, "She's a marvelous woman, very elegant, very smart. She was George's favorite editor, and she was a legend by that time," end quote, said producer Bob Wunsch. Noting Allen's credit on the theatrical posters for Slapshot may have marked the first time any film editor ever received such a distinction. Quote, "She deserved the credit because she was a brilliant editor. Whether she negotiated it or George negotiated it for her, I don't know, but I think you'll find it's the first time that editing was a front credit. It was never on a poster before," end quote. Allen started in the business in the 1940s and worked with Hill for the first time on Slaughterhouse-Five in 1972. She said in an April 2007 interview that she was attracted to the Slapshot script and to the characters, which she felt had been so clearly delineated by Nancy Dowd. Quote, "She's a wonderful woman. She's very funny," end quote, Allen said. Quote, "The story was fun. The characters were great. It helps if you get to know the characters. I'm not just talking about the actors, but the characters," end quote. The movie made such an impression on her that after filming wrapped in Pennsylvania, she bought a new Jeep and excitedly asked the director and his son to come and see it. She proudly showed them how she'd stenciled. Let me start that again. She proudly showed them how she had stenciled Slapshot on the rear window of the vehicle. Quote, "It was evident that she was just as excited by that as by the prospect of owning a new Jeep," end quote, recalled John Hill. Elegant as Allen was, the foul language in the script did not shock, offend, or upset her. She was also not hindered by her lack of hockey knowledge, which consisted of a couple of NHL games in the company of Jerry Hauser.
Nice. Yeah, of course, Jerry Hauser played Chiefs defenseman Dave Killer Carlson. I think his first scene in the movie, he's out for the game, and it's not because he's injured; it's because he got a cold starting his car in a snowstorm. One of the funniest lines in the movie.
That made skull down on my kidneys.
Yeah. Yeah, you hurt your knee in that Peterborough game. Now, Dee Allen, I did read up on her. She actually got into as a film editor in the 1940s because they were short of men to work those jobs because of the war, and that got her the start. And obviously, she was a legend. And now between Nancy Dowd as the writer, Dee Allen as the editor, the supporting actresses, one issue with a lot of sports movies is that women are pretty much ignored, or they're just there as plot devices. But how did the contributions of women really kick Slapshot up a notch?
I should add that Marion Doherty was the casting director on the film.
Yes.
She came in. She was actually the second casting director, but she had also worked with George, who was also a legend in the industry. She told me, without making it seem like she was bragging, that she had basically invented casting, and by that I mean the process of deciding who would be the best actor or actress for a role, as opposed to just, this person works for the studio, they're going to play this part, whether they were capable of it or not. So that was Marion Doherty's contribution to the film industry. But it's a good question about women and the film, because the actresses who played the female characters, whether they were Jennifer Warren as Francine, Reggie's estranged wife, or Lindsay Krause as Lily Braden, Ned Braden's sort of estranged wife, or Catherine Walker as the Chiefs owner, Anita McCambridge. They're all very, very powerful characters. They're obviously the Lily and Ned story is very incidental is very connected to the main thrust of the film. So it's not like she's just this nagging wife in the background who wants to leave town. She's very clearly unhappy, which is having an effect on her relationship, and that relationship then is affecting Ned as a person, and of course he's the best player on the team, and so it's very and then of course there's the notion that Reggie Dunlop thinks that getting next to Lily would be the best way to get Ned crazy enough so that he'll fight. So yeah, it's a very key role. And Francine, Reggie's estranged wife, it would seem like she's a bit of a throwaway role, but she isn't, because she's such a strong character. Like, you never get the sense during the film that at the end she's going to magically change her mind and come back to him. She's her own person now. I don't know how long they've been separated, but she's saying, we got to get divorced one of these days. And then she decides she's leaving town, and she's leaving him behind forever, and she does. And that's not what you would necessarily have expected, maybe even now from a female character in a movie. There's supposed to be appendages of the men, and in these two cases in particular, they clearly were not. They were their own people with their own issues and their own problems, and trying to navigate their own way, rather than just sort of existing as subsets of their male counterparts.
Yeah, true. The more I've watched it, the more I've come to appreciate that. Also, what really always strikes me, and I went back and watched the movie actually twice. While we were prepping for that, once in English, once with the French dubbing and English subtitles on Crave. If anyone's looking for something, if anyone really has a lot of time on their hands, so there's a tip. As we're recording this, I think they just settled the actor strike in Hollywood. But how much does like a movie from this period really show you just the value of quality writing and getting the right people in in as many roles as you can?
That's another good question, because most of the actors in the movie, they're character actors. Like, you wouldn't necessarily know them from anything. Like they weren't really known before the movie. They weren't really known after the movie, except to us aficionados. But that was the genius in the casting, was that they found people that, first of all, they wanted to find actors for the hockey parts who could actually skate and play hockey. And like, you can fake basketball ability, you can fake football ability, you can fake baseball ability. You can't really fake hockey ability that easily, and especially in the 70s, you couldn't really do it that well. So it was really important that they found people who would be believable, and because they did that, and because it was so realistic, that meant they had to get people who weren't necessarily big names and were never going to necessarily be big names, but that's why it worked so well, because they weren't interested on finding names and making stars out of them. They wanted to find people who would serve the characters, and I think that they really did that well.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, Slapshot came out in 1977. I had to check with my parents. Did you go to see this movie? Because I was a newborn that year, and they're like, my mom's like, oh yeah, we saw it in the Kingston Drive-In, and you were asleep in the bassinet the whole time on the back seat. And then she's like, you slept through Star Wars too. And I'm like, yeah, but that would happen if I watched it now as an adult as well. It was a big year for movies, but Slapshot, there was kind of a divided reaction. But one person's reaction I wanted to highlight from reading the book. Why was it significant that Dan Jenkins, great Sports Illustrated writer and author, why was it significant that he called Slapshot the best sports film made roughly during his adult life?
It's significant because he wrote the novel Semi-Tough, whatever you want, however you want to pronounce semi or semi, and it was turned into a movie around that time. Burt Reynolds, Chris Christopherson, and he lost control of that. As opposed to Slapshot, Nancy Dowd wrote the screenplay. She was on set in Johnstown. She was doing rewrites. She was very involved in the process, which doesn't always happen when you're a screenwriter. In the case of Dan Jenkins, he wrote this football novel that should have been a better movie than it was, but it wasn't. And he recognized that. And so he realized that, as good as his intentions were in writing his own material, he knew that Slapshot had turned out better as a film. And it takes a certain kind of person to be able to acknowledge that. And I'm, for one, very grateful that he did acknowledge it, because it gave me a great quote for the book.
Yeah, and if people, I remember getting a paperback of Semi-Tough when I was probably about 17 years old, and then about a year later, a teacher slipped me Jenkins wrote a sequel to it where the Reynolds character, Billy Clyde Puckett, he suffers a career-ending injury and he gets thrown into the broadcast. He gets a broadcasting job, so it's just a complete, just taking the starch out of basically media in general. But the point of that was the teacher slips it to me and goes, yeah, don't let your mother know that I gave you this filth. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I already have the first book. Who do you think got it for me? It's a kind of a runner through here that my mom was pretty liberal about letting me at least, get stuff that maybe you're a little young for this, but you'll adjust. Now, one quote you found from Paul Newman, it was a line he had when he was giving interviews about the movie, was, if something is truly funny, it isn't vulgar. Not to be leading, but has the entertainment industry kind of, sort of forgotten that, or not figured out how to do that without being hurtful?
You're asking a ton of great questions, and this is another one.
I'm sorry for that.
No, it's great because, I mean, I like to be sensitive about, issues, that concern people nowadays. And I don't necessarily want to go back and judge, Slapshot, through a 2023 lens. I mean, it captured a period of time. And I could say the same about the Bad News Bears in 1976, the year before. They're very politically incorrect today, but I don't care because they represented a certain period of time that I don't think we can just pretend didn't happen. And so, like, you could never remake Slapshot today, or you could, but you could never do it genuinely. And we found that out, with the Bad News Bears remake. It was just like it was pointless. There was no point to it at all. Like, if you're not going to sort of capture the reality of the world that was, then why are you doing it? Other than as a cash grab. So yeah, and the same with Blazing Saddles. I mean, like, imagine trying to make that movie nowadays, because that was a satire on racism. You can't tell me that there isn't just as much racism today, if not more, than in 1974 when Mel Brooks made that movie. But you could never make the movie today because you can't lampoon things like that anymore. Things are too untouchable, I guess you could say. So, yeah, somewhere between the 1970s and the 2020s, we lost something as a society. We lost the ability to laugh at things that are uncomfortable. Like, we think that now when something uncomfortable happens, we have to be sufficiently appalled, and we can't sort of treat it with the humor that might actually serve it better than straight outrage, because outrage, it only goes so far, and then it becomes like a diatribe. And with humor, though, you can do a lot of things with humor, and I feel like we have to get that back somehow. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we really need to sort of be able to roll with the punches a little bit more than we do nowadays. Everybody just wants to be offended by something, and I don't know where or how exactly we went wrong there, but if we don't get back to the way it was, I'm not sure where society's going after this.
To some extent, you tell me if I'm really out crazy with this or out of left field with this theory, but how much of a gateway to getting there might be the way we kind of react when a famous person dies, because it's always kind of like, oh, that's so sad. I really like their work. But then at the same time, I'm rubbing my palms and I'm going, let the memes begin. So, maybe that's our road inroad right there.
See, I don't know if I was attracted to becoming a journalist because I had that sense of humor, or whether that just sort of developed, as a reporter. But black humor is very, is very much a thing that I've indulged and developed over the years. And it's hard not to make jokes when bad things happen, because that's how some people deal. And to think that you can't laugh at things that that affect people. I mean, like, this is our life, and we only get one shot at this, and we have to be able to laugh at ourselves, and we have to be able to laugh at other circumstances, because we'll go crazy if we can't.
And something I did want to ask too about, in terms of a current media property that deals with hockey, how much has Shoresy come close, or to what extent has Shoresy come close to being kind of a spiritual successor to Slapshot? Because there's a lot of the same themes, only in that 2020s lens.
I actually read a review of Shoresy that basically said that basically it's almost like Slapshot, and it's maybe as close as we'll ever get to a remake of it. It's and I don't know if that was on the mind of the creator Jared Kiesa when he was creating it, the creator and star and writer. I don't know if that was on his mind when he was creating Shoresy as a series as opposed to just a side character on Letterkenny. But it is very much, it is very similar because, here's this guy, he's sort of coming to the end of the road, so to speak, and realizing that, if you lose and you're done, then what? You got to figure out the rest of your life. And he's not ready to do that. So he embarks on a campaign to manipulate his way into a better situation. So yeah, there are a lot of similarities there. And, that's kind of why, well, I mean, I thought this even before Shoresy, but if they ever did do a remake of Slapshot, I think Jared Keeso would be the perfect Reggie Dunlop.
Yeah, you're going to get to that in our lightning round. Why am I stammering? Now I do have now sort of what's now I should ask personally for yourself. What sort of writing projects have you sort of taken on in the last little while, and where else can people read words and sentences formed by Jonathon Jackson?
Well, I am struggling to come to the end of my master's degree thesis. I am a part-time history student at the University of Waterloo. I've been working on this thesis off and on, kind of like the Slapshot book process. I started a thesis, and then life got in the way, and of course, like things happened with that affected all of us, namely the pandemic. But other family circumstances have sprung up, and and honestly, emotionally, I just haven't been fully there. But I'm coming to the end of that process. I hope to defend my thesis at the end of this year or very early in January. And fittingly, it's a hockey theme. So I'm hoping, that if it continues to go well, if I defend it and everything goes well as far as that goes, I hope to publish that as my second book sometime in the next year or so.
Oh, that'd be amazing. And of course, we'd have to have you back. Now, presumably, since you have written a book about it, Slapshot would be your number one sports movie.
Yes.
Off the top of your head, what's your second favorite? And what is one that you detest so much that the original print of it should be burned with fire?
Probably Slapshot 2 would fall into that category.
Yeah, okay. So yeah. Then,
my second favorite sports movie or second favorite hockey movie?
It could be either.
I was asked this question just recently. It was my second favorite hockey movie, and I've said that, depending on my mood that particular day, my second favorite hockey movie would either be Mystery Alaska or Youngblood.
Oh, okay, yeah, Youngblood, of course, set in Hamilton, where I live.
Yeah.
Although it was filmed in Toronto.
Right.
Why do I know this?
Because I know it too. That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly. All yours, Diener. Of course, now through sportslit.ca, we're going to have a link where you can buy the making of Slapshot and support our guest here. Support a Canadian author who's come up through the ranks. I think in figurative terms, one of the Iron Men of the Federal League. Jonathon, for the lightning round, as you intuited, actually, I was going to ask you to cast a few of the roles with modern actors. Let's pretend we have an unlimited budget for this. We're not looking for character actors who can skate. I was going to rhyme off a few from the supporting female roles. I thought Jillian Jacobs, Britta from Community, Francine Dunlop, a Canadian actress, because we'll be shooting in Canada, so we're going to need to have some Canadians in this to fulfill CRTC mandates and whatnot. Amanda Brugel from The Handmaid's Tale is Lily Braden.
Oh, interesting.
She was also in a comedy series that I loved that no one else ever watched called Seed. About 10 years ago. And Emmy Rossum from Shameless has already played Catherine Walker in a movie. So obviously she has to, we'll have to get her to be Anita Cambridge. Okay, so you're ready for this lightning round?
Yes, I think I'm ready.
Okay, so one, General Manager Joe McGrath.
Dennis Leary.
Oh, nice.
I was thinking about this, like, who could I cast, like, from a hockey person? Like, I want people who know hockey. So, yeah, Dennis Leary.
Okay. Jim Carr, the announcer.
I'm gonna do a shout out to my hometown colleague. His name is Fred Wallace, and he was the longtime sports director at at Bayshore Broadcasting in Owen Sound, CFOS AM, and
Nice.
he's been the voice of the Owen Sound Platers and Attack since 1989 when the team moved to Owen Sound from Guelph, and a magnificent play-by-play guy. But he's done a little bit of acting, so I would nominate him to play Jim Carr.
Okay, I'd scribbled down as my own answer. I'd put Bob Odenkirk, but yeah, but I think Fred. Yeah, sorry, Bob. We're going with Fred. Rookie goalie Denis Lemieux.
Part of the problem that I have with this is I've tried to think of people that I know can skate, because like I said before, you can't really fake hockey ability. So the problem is, there aren't that many people I know who are actors who can also play hockey, and the ones that I do know are like of a certain age that they might not necessarily be believable in the roles. So, Denis Lemieux.
Yeah, I got stuck on this one myself.
Like the only one I can even think of, and it's a ripoff, so forgive me for that. But Justin Timberlake, because he played the goalie in The Love Guru.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought
that's the only one that I could really think of.
Yeah, I was sitting there Googling French actors under 30, and for some reason Timothy Chalamet was in that list. And it was like, okay, you put a beard on him. He kind of looks like him, but obviously we don't know if he can skate. And the second to last one, the all-important second lead in the movie, Ned Braden.
Ned Braden. I was thinking of one of the other Letterkenny guys, like one of the other hockey players, either Dylan Playfair, who plays Riley, or Andrew Herr, who plays Jonesy. And
yeah.
I'd be reluctant with that, though, because then it might seem too much like Letterkenny to have a second Letterkenny guy in the second lead role. But I was trying to think of a guy who's young, who's ostensibly new to pro hockey, who's got a certain idealism about him, who would be tough to convince that, well, yeah, we have to goon it up in order to win. So yeah, I want to go with one of those guys. I can see Andrew Herr playing it better than Dylan Playfair. No offense to Dylan, but I think Andrew Herr would be a better Ned Braden.
And I think Andrew Herr has some sort of Kingston connection, so that's the correct answer.
That I believe so. That is true. Yeah.
And last but not least, I guess I'm going to alter this. Why would Jared Kiso be at this stage be perfect for Reggie Dunlop? And I had actually, when I wrote down, I'm going to ask him, and I'm going to have my choice, I had actually written down in the Word document, Jared Kiso.
He's just he loves hockey. He's just the most prominent hockey playing actor that I know of right now. He's of that age, like he's in his late 30s. So, ostensibly he could play a hockey player or player coach, if you will, who's at the end of his rope or coming to the end of the rope and knowing that, he has to do something to reinvent himself, or because like Shoresy, it's like, well, what do you do if you can't play hockey? You can't see Shoresy doing anything but hockey. So, I just think he'd be perfect for that because, Jared's a very talented guy, a very talented actor and writer. So obviously he has options beyond hockey and the fucking Chrysler plant. But I just think he's so believable. I've actually seen him play hockey. I covered him as a junior hockey player. So, yeah, I've just got a soft spot for him, and that's why he has to be Reg.
Yes, and of course, I'm sure at those games, good seats were still available. But
I got two more I want to throw in. Dr. Hook, Dr. Hook McCracken, Chris Jericho.
Oh yes, nice.
Got hockey credentials. His father is Ted Irvin, a longtime NHL player for the Rangers, Blues, Kings. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in Winnipeg, so definitely a Canadian content requirement fulfilled there. And here's one that will throw you at first, but when you think about it, you'll agree that I'm right. Ogie Oglethorpe, J.J. Watt.
Yes, because J.J. Watt was a hockey player growing up in Wisconsin, I think.
That's right. So yeah, not Canadian content per se, but definitely has hockey cred, and he's got the size and the strength to, convincingly play, the biggest uber goon in the Federal League.
Yeah, the biggest goon. They should to throw this guy in San Quentin.
Yeah.
Well, Jonathan, I don't know if this could...
and plus he hosted Saturday Night Live once, so he does have some acting ability that, as far as we know.
Yes, he played himself in an episode of New Girl.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, where Zoe Deschanel's character she shows up at a funeral for a guy she went on a couple dates with, and the guy passed away suddenly, and then it turned out the guy JJ Watt was a client. It was his agent, and he showed up because he had tried to fire the guy as his agent. and then he's like, I really shouldn't be here, and why are we here? And it's a caper. Well, Jonathan, really appreciate it. Of course, the book is The Making of Slapshot, revised 46th anniversary edition, available through Double J Media and you can buy through Amazon.ca. I think that went very well.
I think we captured the spirit of the thing.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nate. I had a great time being here. Thank you.